We're in Genesis 13, verse 5 is where we left off on Wednesday evening. So if you'd like to open your Bibles to that passage, that's where we'll begin our study today. We're not quite keeping up with Mark and the kids back there, but we're doing the best we can. We're covering some material anyway. Chapter 13, verse 5. Before we begin, let's bow our heads in a word of prayer toward God. Our Heavenly Father, we approach your throne this morning thanking you for every blessing you give us, for seeing us through the night, for the rest that we have received, and for the strength we derive. We ask that you will continue to bless us as you always have. Bless us as we've come together to study from your word and to worship you in spirit and in truth. We are so thankful that we live in a nation where we're able to do this without fear, without any reprisal from those who are in the governing authorities or even for those who are critical of us or who live around about us. We hope and pray that such a situation will continue for many generations to come. We ask your blessings on us as we go throughout this hour of Bible study, and that we might glean from your word the things that we stand in need of and make those applications to our lives to be better servants of yours while we live here below. We ask that you will watch over the sick of our number, those who are unable to be out and worship with us today, and that if it be your will, that you would lay your healing hand upon them and bring them back to a normal portion of health, so that they might be able to come back out and be with us once more. Forgive us of our wrongs and help us as we go throughout life to live in such a way as to be an example, and others might see your word and your life within us, so that we might be able to convert them and that they might become members of the body of Christ and be able to spend eternity with us and with you in the afterwhile. Watch over us, keep us in your care, guide us in everything that we say and do, and bless us always in life. Save us in death. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we came talking about Abimelech. Always kind of liked Abimelech here. There are several Abimelechs, or a couple of Abimelechs actually in the Old Testament. This particular Abimelech seems to be a pretty decent guy. In the preceding chapter, this happens twice to Abraham and once to Isaac, his son. This is something that is questionable as to what they do, although Abraham does point out to Abimelech that Sarah is indeed his sister, because she is the daughter of his father, but not the same mother. Okay, so she's a half sister. That's, I guess, probably where the phrase half-truth comes from. The problem is, it's not just wrong to tell a falsehood, it's also wrong to deceive, and that's what Abraham does. So it's questionable here. This is something that perhaps he should not have done, but out of fear, of course, he told Abimelech, because of the fear, he felt that there was no fear of God in this place, and he knew that Sarah was beautiful to look upon, even though she was not a young girl anymore. He was afraid of what might happen, and of course, that's exactly what happened. They did see that she was a very beautiful woman and did take her for Abimelech. Abimelech is described as the king of Gerar, and he dwells in the land that would be known as the land of the Philistines. The Philistines are not known as very good people, are they? All right. Especially in the times of the judges, of Samuel, of David, even of King Saul in the middle between Samuel and David. The Philistines are a real terror as far as the Jews are concerned, or the Israelites are concerned. And so it's interesting that Abimelech here seems to be a pretty decent fellow and actually has a relationship with the God of heaven, because God actually speaks to him in a dream, and he returns Sarah, his wife, Abraham's wife, to him. Now, interestingly, a lot of people say, this is the same story. It's just Moses got it messed up, or whoever it was that wrote this got it messed up and just recorded it twice. Well, it's a similar story, but there are differences in it. One is the king of Egypt, or the Pharaoh. The other is Abimelech, the king of Gerar. And the other thing that stands out, I believe, that the reason this is two different stories here, and that this isn't messed up, this is just that this happened twice, is the fact that when Pharaoh is confronted by this, what does he do to Abraham? He doesn't harm him. He's afraid to harm him, but get out of my country. He sends him away. He actually orders his men to see to it that he leaves the land. Now, he doesn't take back the possessions he gave him, which is how Abraham received so many riches. But he says, you're not welcome here. He boots him out of Egypt, right back up into the land of Canaan. What does Abimelech do, though? Okay, he says, dwell wherever you want in my land. You sojourn here and keep the belongings that I gave you. This is a witness between me and you that I'm innocent of this. And things just work out pretty well, generally speaking. We're going to later meet Abimelech again, and Abimelech is going to exact a promise from Abraham that he'll deal well with his progeny, those who follow after his posterity, I believe the King James says. His descendants, your descendants, my descendants, that they treat each other well and fairly. He's concerned about that. He knows that Abraham is going to be a mighty nation. So there's a lot to be said about that. I believe that Abimelech seems to be a pretty decent fella here. Maybe not perfect, but he does seem to be one of the holdouts, one of the people in the patriarchal age, at least, who believes in God, the one God of heaven. Maybe he worships idols too, we're not told, but he does have respect for Jehovah God, doesn't he? And when God appears to him and speaks to him in the dream, he does exactly what God says. So then we see that Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife. What am I talking? I'm talking about Abimelech here. I'm sorry. Reason I'm confused about that is that's what we were studying last night, my wife and I, for the Bible Bowl. But yes, this is Egypt here. Abimelech, this is going to happen in chapter 20. Sorry about that. You got a preview. But anyway, in chapter 20, we're going to read about Abimelech, the same thing happening to this. But Abram, it says, goes up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. That is the south of the land of Canaan, right? He goes into the south of the land of Canaan. Actually, from Egypt, it's more to the northeast. All right, that's the direction he's going, but it is in the southern part of the land of Canaan. He comes to Bethel, the place where his tent had been before, between Bethel and Ai, the city of Ai. Remember that city was not a real big city when Joshua crossed over into over the Jordan, and they took Jericho. That was a big walled, fortified city, and they took Jericho without any trouble because they listened to God. And then they decided, well, we don't need the whole army. We'll just pick a few guys and we'll go up and we'll whoop up on Ai. It didn't work out for them, though, did it? This is the city that he's talking about here, where Abraham dwelled, between Bethel and Ai, and unto the place of the altar which he had made there at first, where Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Or there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. That's where he first entered into the land of Canaan. This is also called the Plain of Mammary, or some translations, the English Standard renders this the Oaks of Mammary. It's very possible. It could be either way. We're not entirely sure of the word here in its etymology. It may be a grove of oak trees planted by a man named Mamre. The Jewish historians actually look back at this and they say that this was a man that Abraham was befriended by when he came into the land of Canaan. And so he was able to sojourn here. Well, we don't have all the details in the scripture about that. It makes sense. It's possible, at least. Maybe he planted this grove of oak trees. A lot of times groves of trees were planted for superstitious reasons. I don't believe that Abraham dwelt in the oaks because of superstition. I believe he probably dwelt under the oaks for the same reason I like to live under the oaks, which I actually have 3 big oak trees in my yard. It's nice in the summertime, isn't it? It's a real pain in the fall, but it's nice in the summertime. And it's really nice and cool and breezy under the oak trees. That's probably the reason why Abraham liked it as well. And that brings him as well. He's living with his uncle Abraham, and because of this, he's prospering as well, isn't he? So all the good things that are happening to Abraham, good things are happening for Lot as well, just by association. You'll remember Laban realized that when Jacob was living in close proximity and working for and with him, that he was prospering greatly because Jacob was there. He knew the Lord was prospering Jacob. And so he did everything he could to trick Jacob into staying longer. First by giving him Leah for a wife instead of Rachel after 7 years. And then said, that's okay, you can have Rachel too, but I need another 7 years out of you. So there's 14, and then for the cattle, he says, you need to serve me another 6 years. That makes an even 20. So for 20 years, he kept him there. You know what would have been a better way to be blessed by God? You serve God just like Jacob does, or you serve God just like Abraham does. Well, Lot was a righteous man, we know that, but he's not the great figure of faith that Abraham was, of course. But Lot too was called a righteous man in the scriptures as well. So he's prospering too because of being righteous before God, but also because he's around the great Abraham as well. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. They just had too many herds, too many donkeys, too many goats and sheep and cattle, whatever else they might have had. And because they were so great, and they were trying to keep them separate from each other so they didn't get confused, they began to get into some entanglements with each other. It began to be a problem. Look at verse 7. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. Why is that phrase stuck in there? Just incidentally or what? I don't think so. I don't think this is a coincidence here that this is here. You see, these are the people of God. These are the people of Jehovah God, the one true and living God. And God is always concerned with the perspective of the people of the world when they view his children. People who are following God need to behave in a certain way. So here the problem is that if Abram and Lot and their people are not getting along and they're fighting amongst each other, then that doesn't look good, does it? The Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land. They were in close proximity. They were observing this. And so that brings about what Abram suggests here in verse 8. Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Well, we would say today, no, not brethren. They were uncle and nephew, but brethren just simply means kinsmen here, doesn't it? They're brothers, that is, that they are related. They're relatives or kinspeople. Okay? And so Abram makes this suggestion. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me, and if thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. That's a very magnanimous gesture on Abraham's part, isn't it? Whichever Lot, I'm going to give you the choice. You go wherever you want to go. Wherever you go, I'll go the other way, and then that way we'll be enough distance between us that we'll be able to get along. Okay? And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Zoar is a little town. It's not called Zoar just yet. That's going to come after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the only one of those cities that survives the devastation. And the only reason it survives it is because Lot makes the request to go to that city. The original name of the city is Bela. We don't even know what that word means. I actually looked it up and said, okay, what does Bela mean? Nobody knows. It's just the name of this little city. And because it was such a small city, God spared it for the sake of Lot, so that Lot could go to that city. He didn't feel that he would be able to make the journey into the mountains. But anyway, he lifts up his eyes and he beholds how this plain of Jordan is so well watered. And he gives a couple examples here. Now, of course, he says this is before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's watered like the garden of the Lord. What is the garden of the Lord? Garden of Eden. Remember, there were two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they came together out of four heads, the Pishon, the Hiddekel, and the Tigris and the Euphrates River. So it was a very well-watered place, probably flooded from time to time, taking the waters, the sediment in the water, and bringing it up onto the land and letting it settle down. Bottom land. Bottom land. If you do any gardening, you know something about bottom land. It's very well fertilized, isn't it? Very nutrient rich. Same thing's true of Egypt, like the land of Egypt. Every year in the springtime, what happens to the Nile River? Overflows its banks. And when it does, it brings all that sediment that's churned up and lays it out over the land. And then when the waters recede, that stays there. Now that's kind of an inconvenience. You know, it's difficult when water floods. But in the summertime, when the waters recede, you got all of that fertile land to work, either for cattle to graze on or for you to grow crops in. So again, this is a very desirable place, good bottom land, and Lot's looking forward to grazing all his herds down there in the plain. As you come to Zoar, the little city, all right? Do you see a problem here between Abraham and Lot? Who's more magnanimous here? Without a doubt. Abraham makes the offer, but who's greater, Abraham or Lot? Who's greater among the two of them? Abraham, of course, all right? Lot may be a righteous man. It's even said of him that he was a righteous man, all right, in several places. But he's not the faithful man that Abraham is. And he's certainly not the man through whom Isaac would be born and the seed that would bless all nations would be born. That comes through Abraham. So Abraham is the one who here is being very generous and giving Lot the choice. You know, would have probably made me feel a little better about Lot is if Lot had said to Abram, how about you choose? That's a good idea, but I'm going to let you choose. You go where you want and I'll go the other way. You see, Abraham makes this gesture, and Lot takes him up on it, but it would have been so much better. As a younger man, someone who should have been subject to Abraham, had he just looked at him and said, Uncle, tell you what, you're my uncle, I'm just a nephew. You choose and I'll go the other way. But that's neither here nor there because that's not what happened, is it? Lot saw what looked good to him, and he made his decision. Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from the other. Okay, so that's going to help some things here. It's going to help them to get along a little better. It's also going to help Abraham, I think, too, just a little bit. We're going to see something that happens. It hasn't happened for a while, at least as far as what the scriptures say. It did happen when Abraham was called, and he was promised, get out of your country and away from your father's house and from your kindred and go to the land that I'll show you, and I'll give you all these blessings. Okay? He's going to renew that blessing now. And I believe it is significant when Abraham separates from Lot. Because technically, has Abraham fully separated from all of his kindred? He hasn't, has he? All right. Now, the point that we could probably take here is the fact that Lot seems to be a righteous man. So he's a worshiper of Jehovah God. He's not an idolater, at least as far as we know. Okay. But idolatry was something that Terah was involved in, Abraham's father. And there's still idolatry in the land when Jacob goes up there and Laban has those household gods, those teraphim. So yes, they still were involved in idolatry, and that Rachel stealing those household gods may have had a lot to do with Israel being idolatrous 400 years later when they enter into the land of Canaan to possess it. May have had a lot to do with that, the influence of it. Okay, so Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. That was a mistake. Anybody want to debate me on that? I wouldn't think so. Okay, he pitched his tent toward Sodom. This is the last we hear about Lot until the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Where is Lot now? He goes down into the plain with his herdmen and his cattle and all of his possessions, separates from his uncle Abraham, and he pitches his tent where? In the city or toward it? He pitches his tent toward Sodom. So he's nearby. The next time we read of Lot, where's he at? He's in the city, sitting in the gate. Okay? That's the problem. When you hug up to the world, what happens? Okay? This is what happened with Lot. Lot kind of got drawn into that city. And although he's a righteous man and he's trying to do what's right, the scriptures say that his righteous soul was vexed by the people. Can you imagine? Can you imagine living in such a situation like that? Right, and he did. Somewhere along the line, it seems like he did lose it. And it may have been, maybe that's the reason why he was in Sodom. Maybe he was tricked out of all of his possessions. Maybe he wasn't as righteous as he should have been. Okay, maybe those possessions were stolen or taken from him in some way, shape, or form. It seems, at least, that he doesn't have very much. And after the destruction of the cities, it's just he and his daughters, and the daughters actually think they're the only ones left in the world. They believe the whole world's been destroyed by fire. Okay, at least all the human beings, all their lives have been snuffed out. We'll get to that in just a little bit too. All right. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So we know that was a mistake. You pitch your tent towards Sodom, and the next thing you know, you're right in the middle of it. Okay? Got himself into a situation, very sticky situation, terrible, having to go through the things that he did. Okay, in verse 14, and the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him. Okay, so this is significant. Lift up thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. Every direction. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Okay, so here's the promise to Abraham. You see this land? This is going to be given to your seed. Not to you, Abraham. Now remember that. This promise is given to Abraham, but it's not for Abraham. It's for his descendants. All right? We also want to note about the word forever here. Does that mean eternally? For an age of time, for a long period of time, or until the end of the age. A lot of times that's what it means. And it does this here. In fact, this is not an eternal promise given to the Jews, so that today, that the Jews who are living in Palestine today have a biblical right to the ownership of the land of Canaan. It's not there. Okay? Now someone says, oh, you mean you're agreeing with the Palestinians? Well, not really, not particularly. They have a right to live there as well as anyone else, and they need to get along and live together over there because they both have a claim to the land now. Although their religious and ideological differences are going to put them at odds with each other, it's a powder keg. It's a powder keg over there. It doesn't take very much to set it off, does it? I would love to see the land where Jesus walked, to walk around the Sea of Galilee, to visit Jerusalem, to visit Bethlehem, to visit these sites. But it's just not, in my mind, worth the risk. It was bad before. It always has been bad. But it's not getting better. It's getting worse. All right? It's a dangerous, dangerous place. Now, when I say believe that the Jews have a right from the Scriptures to say, well, God gave us this land and it's ours. He did for a time, and as long as they were faithful to Him. Question, were they always faithful to Him? They weren't. They weren't. And while they were given and allowed to have at least a remnant of them come back from Babylon, where they maintained the land and maintained their sovereignty as a nation for a time, their rejection of the Christ, the Messiah, it sealed their destruction. When the Romans came in 70 AD and destroyed the temple and killed or captured every one of the religious leaders, they moved them off. It's not been the same ever since. So today we do have what we call the Israelis who live there now, descendants of the Jews, yes, but also from other people as well. So much so that they've been thinned down and they can't really claim to be from, with any degree of certainty, from any of the tribes, from any of them. Probably, if they do have any of it, probably be Judah more than anything. But that's the reason why they don't have a Levitical priesthood, because they can't really trace anyone back to the descendants of Levi, or Aaron for that matter, which they need to be able to do. So again, this is not a promise that Israel would be able to possess the land forever. Now that being said, politically and ideologically, this country is allied with Israel, and I believe they are more friendly and much more reasonable for the United States to deal with today than many of the other nations in that area. And I believe that's a smart move. I really do. I think that is a good thing to be allied with them. But that's just an opinion. That's not from Scripture. I'm not saying that we need to do that because these are the people of God and we need to be friends with them. I'm not saying that. If you want to be a friend of God, you don't have to be an Israelite anymore, do you? You can follow God and be a Gentile. You can be a Russian. You can be a Chinese person. You can be Asian. You can be African. You can be any type of a person. As long as you want to follow God and you obey Him, you can be a Christian, be a part of that kingdom. So no, I'm not saying that the United States should be allied with Israel today because they are the people of God and we need to be friends with the people of God. We need to be the people of God. All of us do, Israel included, and the United States and all the nations. We need to serve God. So that's the point we want to make there. This forever here is not a promise of eternal possession of that land. Verse 16, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. So Abraham is challenged. Start counting the particles of dust that are in the world. Okay, that would be quite a monumental task. You can't do it. He says, well, your seed's going to be so numerous that no one's going to be able to number them. How many Jews have ever been on the face of this earth? We can't do that today either, can we? We don't know. We can only estimate. We can't really come up with any good numbers. He says, arise and walk through the land, in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Again, giving it to Abraham meant to give it to his posterity, to his descendants. And Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mammary, or the oaks of Mammary again, which is in Hebron. and there and build an altar there unto the Lord. And Hebron is a city about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. This is where Abram was many times dwelling. He dwelled there for a time. We're going to see that he'll live there for a while. But then after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he kind of removes from that place. It's a little too close in proximity to that. We just don't have any way of grasping the kind of destruction. Just like we said about the flood, it wasn't just a rainstorm and a little bit of a flood, a little bit of water's coming up. This was the wrath of Jehovah God. And we just can't quite picture it in our minds just how devastating it was. The same thing with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. When Abraham saw the smoke ascending up from Sodom and found out about the cities of the plain and what happened, it doesn't take Abraham long. He doesn't want to be anywhere near that anymore. He winds up down in the south toward Beersheba. But for now, he's going to stay near Hebron, close to Jerusalem, about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. So,
side note that Hebron was one of the highest elevations in that area. So
okay.
From the plains, anything from, he had a Jehovah site in all of that.
Okay, like a bird's eye view, huh? Yeah, it's kind of nice to be up high and be able to look around and to see a great distance. And that's where Abraham preferred to dwell. He wanted to be able to see down the hillside rather than being down in the bottom and not being able to see very far. He liked being up a little higher. And that's okay. That's good. And then he was, of course, able to get up in the morning and see the destruction of Sodom, too. As far away as it was, he was still able to see the smoke ascending from it. Okay, on chapter 14, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar, Ariat, king of Azar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of the nations. These men here, and this is going to be a difficult thing in the Bible Bowl, trying to keep these names straight and knowing who these guys were. Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Where's Shinar? Remember, that's where Babel was built. We talked about Babel or Babel, some people call it that, in the plain of Shinar, which later became what? Very well-known nation, even well-known secularly today. And that's the nation of Babylon, okay? It is thought by some, according to Dehoff's commentary, that this Babylonian king, Amraphel, may have been actually Hammurabi, who is one of the most well-known historic kings of Babylon. Maybe. We just don't know. But this is one of the kings we're talking about. Now, when I say kings, we generally think of a king as being a ruler over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Well, that may or may not be the case. We might call them like chiefs or chieftains, maybe over a group of people that live in a certain area. Maybe a few hundred men, maybe 500, maybe 1,000 men, something of that nature. But these kings all banded together, apparently, and had subjugated all of the cities of the plain and some of the others as well in Canaan. All right, then you have Ariat, the king of Ellasar. Not sure exactly where that is. Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam. And Tidal, the king of nations. Now, there are different names that are given to this nation. Goyim is in the English Standard Version. It may just be that he banded together several different groups of people and became a powerful man in his own right. Well, these all banded together, and they subjugated all these other places. And these made war with Bera, the king of Sodom, with Beersheba, the king of Gomorrah, Shinab of Adamah, and Shemember, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. He's not mentioned by name, but which is also Zoar. Remember the little city, Bela, is also called the little city Zoar. That's what Zoar means, the little. So all these kings come together here. You have the 4 kings against 5 kings, as we're going to see. But these 5 kings had been subjugated by the 4. They were more powerful. They'd been subjugated and were probably paying taxes or tribute to them. These were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. What is the Salt Sea? The Dead Sea, okay? I don't know if the Salt or Dead Sea was always like it is today. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a little more lush and green. Maybe other things, things were done around that sea. Right now, it's pretty barren, isn't it? Pretty devoid of life, which is why it's called the Dead Sea, other than maybe a few microorganisms that can survive in those briny, mineral-rich waters. I don't know. People go down there and they like to float around or swim around in the Dead Sea. That might be interesting, but they also recommend when you get out of that sea that you get a shower and clean off. One thing, I don't know about you, a lot of people like to float on top of the water. I have a hard time. I guess it's probably because of my long legs. I can't float very well. I start out floating, everyone says, just relax. Well, I'll relax and I'll lay back there. And the next thing I know, I'm straight up and down because my feet have gone to the bottom and I just don't float very well. But I understand in the Dead Sea, you can't sink. You can't sink in it. It's so full of minerals that you just lay down in it and you just kind of float there. I don't know if I'd want to be in that or not. It'd be kind of like swimming in pudding, I think, is what I would think. So it's not really what you might think. It's a large body of water. It's one of the lowest places on the earth. All right, and it is very unusual in the fact that water flows into it, but no water flows out of it. And interesting analogies are made about like the Sea of Galilee is full of life. It receives water, but it also sends water out. It becomes the Jordan River. And the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea, and everything stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. So a lot of things could be said about that. But anyway, this is the area, the northern tip of the Dead Sea. Now, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebel. Okay, so Chedorlaomer seems to be the kind of the head of all these kings, these four kings that have subjugated all these other kings, and they had been controlling them. So they defeated them, and they came to an agreement, had a covenant with them, and they paid their taxes and their tributes, and everything was fine for 12 years. But then on the 13th year, they decided no more. We're not paying tribute to them anymore. So they rebelled against them. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him and smote the Rephaims, that's a powerful race of people in Canaan, in Ashtaroth, Karnaim and the Zurims in Ham, and the Emims, another powerful group, considered to be a very tall people, in Sheba and Kiriathaim. So these are places in the land of Canaan. And the Horites in their Mount Seir to El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Mount Seir is the place where Edom, Esau's descendants, later would drive these Horites out of the land and they would take it over. So the Edomites or Esau's descendants would dwell there. They're related to the Israelites because of Jacob and Esau. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat. This is called the Well of Judgment. It's probably called this because this is the place where judgment was pronounced by God upon Moses and Aaron for their rebellion at that place. The waters of Meribah is also called, and Mishpat. So here you have Moses writing back, and apparently after this incident, Moses is writing and just kind of mentioning this. This is the name of the place now, just like he calls the name of the city Zoar, although it's never been called that yet. That's not until after Lot makes his plea for the city to be spared. It's just a little city, just a little one, spare it. And so the angel said he would, and he got the name Little, the little city, Zoar. Okay? All right, and the country of the Amalekites, En-Mishpat is in Kadesh. He smote the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that dwell in Hazan Tamar. Okay, again, all these places and all these names are very difficult to ascertain. But you get the idea. They're coming, they're making their rounds, and they're They're bringing people back in line, these kings. And there went out the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar. And they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim. All right. When you think of the destruction of Sodom, you think of usually just the one city. But there was more than one. There were 5 cities here. 5 cities, and 4 of them are going to be consumed by fire, brimstone. And probably 5 would have been if it hadn't been for Lot pleading for the little city of Zoar. Okay? But they all go out to war against these 4 kings, with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, Tidal, the king of the nations, Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Ariat, the king of Elasar. 4 kings with 5. 4 against 5. All right, so you think, okay, 5 kings against 4. 5 will overcome the 4, right? No, didn't happen that way, did it? Didn't happen. And in the vale of Siddim, it was full of slime pits. Okay, sounds like a nice place. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. We're going to find out that the king of Sodom does escape, but his people do not, all right? And so many of them fell into these slime pits. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals, that is, their food, their supplies, and went their way. All right, if they had stopped there, they might have got away with it. But in the next verse, they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelled in Sodom, and his goods, and they departed. All right, so not only did they take what was valuable that they had worked for, their food and their possessions, but they were also human traffickers as well. They took people, and they made slaves of them or subjugated them because they realized that they could gain strength and gain wealth this way. So human trafficking has always been an incident, hasn't it? It's always been incidental to the human condition. It's always been around. Doesn't make it right, but it has been. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram, the Hebrew, descendant of Eber. That's what a Hebrew is. And for he dwelled in the plain of Mammary, or in the oaks of Mammary, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So Mammary is the Amorite. He's an Amorite who owned this land, apparently. So the oaks of Mammary, or the plain of Mammary, belonged to this Amorite who was confederate with Abram. That is, they were friends. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them to Dan. And we're going to find out that Abram had 318 just himself. That's how powerful Abram was. And then these other men that are mentioned here most likely joined along with Abram in going after these kings. Well, that doesn't sound like they have much of a chance against kings and nations, does it? Well, maybe under normal circumstances they wouldn't. But who are we dealing with here? Abram has God, doesn't he? And that always makes the difference. Okay? And he pursued them to Dan. Where is Dan? There's a phrase that's uttered over and over again in the Old Testament. From Dan to Beersheba. What's that mean? Well, generally it means everything that is Israel. All the land of Israel, all the people of Israel. And the reason why is because Dan is at the extreme northern edge of Israel's border, and Beersheba is at the extreme southern edge. So north, south, and everything in between. Okay? So Dan is up to the northern edge, up to the north of the Sea of Galilee, as a matter of fact, and close, a little bit further east, not straight up, but further east, northeast from where Abraham is at this point. Okay? And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So they're clear up into Syria, aren't they? All right? He pursued them to Dan. Now here's something that's interesting. He divided his forces. He divided himself against them and attacked from different directions. Is that a smart military tactic? With God on your side it is, But generally speaking, we use the phrase divide and conquer, don't we? Okay. You generally want to keep your forces together, be as strong as you possibly can. But perhaps at God's instruction, he said, divide yourselves up into so many groups and you attack from all directions, and I'll be with you. Well, God with them, things were able to work out. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer. So Chedorlaomer is killed, and these kings are no longer going to be an issue or a problem. And of the kings that were with him at the valley of Sheba, which is the king's dale, or the king's valley. All right. So this turned out pretty well. Abraham, with his 318 trained men, and probably these other men that are mentioned, Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Anar. These are all confederates with Abraham. So these are all people that probably joined with Abram's 318 and were able to do this. Now what happens next is kind of a mysterious thing. Verse 18 talks about a man named Melchizedek. You've heard about him. The book of Hebrews likes to talk about Melchizedek. We'll go over that. But Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. So what does that tell us about Melchizedek? Is he an idolater? He is not. He brings bread and wine, that is bread and grape juice. It doesn't mean necessarily alcoholic wine, but it means the juice of the grape, and he brings bread for them to consume. He's a priest of the Most High God, not idolatry, but Jehovah God himself. We don't know who Melchizedek is. Hebrews says that he's without father and without mother, having no genealogy. That doesn't mean he didn't have a father and a mother, or a genealogy for that matter. It just means they weren't available to the Jews. They didn't know. This just drove the Jews up a wall. They couldn't stand that. They needed to know, where did this guy come from? And they of course they had their theories. Some of them believed that Melchizedek was actually Shem. Remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth? Was that possible? I mean, that was hundreds of years. How old did Shem live to be? 600 or something. I can't remember the exact number. But yes, this is very possible. It could have been Shem. It could have been Arphaxad, Shem's son. It could have been one of these guys. It could have been Eber. Okay, we don't know exactly who it was. But the interesting thing to note is that Abram has respect for him. So it's very likely one of his predecessors. Someone, maybe an ancestor of Abram's. Okay? And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand." And he gave him tithes of all. Abram paid a tenth to this priest. Under the patriarchal age, they were to give a tenth to the priest. Just like in the Mosaic age, they were to give a tenth for the keeping of the priests in the land of Canaan, you see. We don't know a lot of the details about the patriarchal age, but there are little snippets here and there that we gain. They gave a tenth of what they came in contact with, what they had prospered. And Abraham gave this tenth to Melchizedek. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It also says he's the king of Salem. Where's that? He would be in the general region of Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem, in other words. He's the king of Salem, or king of peace. Some have said, well, it means peace too. Shalom means peace. That's the standard greeting that the Jews had for each other. So he's the king of Shalom or Salem. Or perhaps it has to do geographically with the area of Jerusalem. We're not sure, or not 100% sure anything about Melchizedek. So if you think it drives you boggy, Think about the Jews, because they needed a genealogy. They needed to know where they came from and who this person was. And they kept meticulous records about everybody. And interestingly enough, you have Matthew's account and Luke's account of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. You don't have anywhere any record of anybody contesting those genealogies. And surely they would have done that. They would have looked into that, first of all, because he claims to be the Messiah. Let's check his genealogy out. We'll stop this real quick. But when they check it out, they find out on both sides he's a descendant through David, and he's definitely qualified to be the Messiah in that regard. So you never see anything brought up about his genealogy, do you? Okay? They kept meticulous records about that. Meticulous. So they would have drove them nuts that they couldn't figure out who Melchizedek was. So if it bothers you, you're not alone. We're out of time. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, in our study on Wednesday evening.